She's my older cousin, confident and untouchable, until she looks at me and says, "I want you." Simple as that. The young man, 25, had always been curious about his older cousin. He hadn't seen her in years, yet memories of her confidence, warmth, and the subtle elegance she carried lingered in his mind. Visiting her home felt like stepping into a familiar yet unfamiliar world. The house smelled faintly of lavender and polished wood, an understated elegance that matched her personality. From the moment he stepped inside, she noticed him, her eyes lingering a second longer than expected. She greeted him with a smile, warm, effortless. Yet there was an edge to it that made his stomach twist in a way he didn't expect. Her hand brushed against his arm as she led him into the living room, just enough for him to feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. It was a simple touch, but the impact lingered, an unspoken promise of connection that startled him. The room was softly lit, late afternoon sunlight filtering through sheer curtains, casting a golden glow on the furniture and the faint dust motes dancing in the air. The hum of a record played quietly in the background, soft jazz notes curling around them, blending with the sound of distant birds outside. Every detail seemed heightened: the smell of her perfume, the smooth texture of her cashmere sweater, the sound of her voice when she laughed lightly at some small joke. He tried to focus on ordinary conversation, commenting on the house, asking after her life, but there was something in the way she moved, in the tilt of her head, in the way her eyes followed him across the room, that made it impossible to think clearly. His chest tightened, a nervous, electric awareness of her presence that he hadn't anticipated. And then she said it, not teasingly, not jokingly, but quietly, confidently, as though stating a simple truth that required no justification. "I want you," simple as that. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy yet oddly natural. He blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly, his heart thudding. Her gaze held his, unwavering, challenging, and yet warm, like a spark held too close, threatening to ignite. There was no pressure, no rush, but the intensity of the moment left him momentarily frozen. He became acutely aware of every detail: the subtle curve of her lips, the soft rise and fall of her chest as she exhaled, the gentle sway of her hair that brushed the edge of her shoulder. It was a combination of familiarity and something entirely new, thrilling, and forbidden. He wanted to respond, to reach out, to say something that would bridge the gap between the ordinary visit and the extraordinary undercurrent of desire that now pulsed between them, but he hesitated. And in that hesitation, in the charged silence that stretched between them, the slow-burn tension of their story ignited, promising that this encounter would mark the beginning of something far deeper than either of them expected. After that first encounter, the young man couldn't shake her words. "I want you," simple as that. The clarity, the confidence, and the quiet intensity in her voice replayed in his mind over and over. Every mundane action suddenly seemed charged with meaning. The way she laughed, the casual brush of her hand against his, the tilt of her head as if silently challenging him to acknowledge what was between them. He found himself walking on a tightrope of emotions. On one hand, there was admiration and affection, a sense of comfort he hadn't felt in years. On the other, there was hesitation, a knot of guilt and uncertainty twisting in his stomach. She was his older cousin, a woman with decades of experience and a quiet gravitas, and he was barely out of his 20s. The thought of crossing lines he'd never even considered before left him uneasy, even as desire hummed insistently beneath the surface. Every interaction became a test of restraint. In the kitchen, reaching for the same glass of water, their hands brushed lightly. He felt the warmth of her skin, a fleeting, electric sensation that made his pulse quicken. She didn't pull away immediately. Her fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and she looked up at him with that same steady gaze, one eyebrow raised just slightly, as if silently asking, "Are you going to do something or not?" Even in casual conversation, the tension was palpable. She spoke about her day, the subtle frustrations of her work, moments of nostalgia for her past. And he listened, absorbing every word, every nuance, every hesitation in her tone. He noticed the little details, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her lips curved almost imperceptibly when she was amused, the way she shifted closer to him on the couch without any overt reason. He tried to distract himself, to focus on mundane thoughts or obligations, but his mind always drifted back to her. He imagined her walking down a sunlit hallway, her hair catching the light, the soft sway of her hips, the gentle warmth radiating from her presence. The attraction was undeniable, but the weight of social perception, the complexity of family ties, and his own uncertainty made him hesitant to act. At night, lying in bed, he replayed every glance, every accidental touch, every soft word. He wondered what she truly meant, and whether her confession was an impulsive spark or something deeper. He felt a longing that was both thrilling and terrifying, a desire to bridge the gap between what was permissible and what he secretly wanted. The hesitation was torturous but beautiful. It made him more aware of the subtleties, the warmth of her shoulder near his, the unintentional brush of her fingers, the quiet laughter that seemed directed only at him. In every small gesture, the slow burn tension built, promising a connection that was dangerous in its intensity, yet irresistibly magnetic. By the end of the day, he realized he was no longer thinking about right or wrong. He was thinking only of her, of the next shared glance, the next lingering touch, the next moment that might bring them closer or push them further apart. And in that realization, the story of their slow burn began to truly take shape. The days that followed their first encounter were a delicate dance of proximity and restraint. Every moment together was charged, yet they spoke in measured tones, letting the weight of silence carry the tension. One evening, the young man found himself sitting across from his older cousin in her softly lit living room, a mug of tea warming his hands while the faint hum of a record played in the background. The air was thick with unspoken words, yet it felt safe, intimate, and strangely comforting. They talked about life, about regrets, and the quiet disappointments that no one else would understand. She spoke of her youth with a wistful smile, revealing small vulnerabilities beneath her confident exterior. He listened intently, captivated not only by her stories but by the subtle gestures, the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup, the way her eyes glimmered with the weight of unshared memories, the soft sighs that escaped her when a memory touched her heart. He realized that attraction wasn't the only force binding them. There was understanding, a quiet recognition of each other's inner world. When he shared his own hesitations about the future, she leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening, and for a moment, the physical space between them seemed to shrink. Her hand brushed against his as she reached for a book on the table, lingering longer than necessary. A touch so fleeting yet so electric it left him acutely aware of every nerve ending. Their connection was defined not by bold gestures, but by the subtleties of presence. A tilt of her head, a pause in conversation, a laugh that seemed just a little too private. It was as though the world outside had ceased to exist whenever they were near. And in these unspoken exchanges, something deeper began to blossom. Trust, admiration, and a longing neither of them dared to name aloud. He caught himself studying her in quiet moments, the way her hair fell across her shoulder, the curve of her smile when she was lost in thought, the subtle strength in the line of her jaw. He was drawn to her in ways he hadn't anticipated, not only for her beauty or her age, but for the depth she carried, the life experience etched into the softness of her expressions. A particularly quiet moment sealed the tension between them. She was arranging some papers on the coffee table, and he instinctively reached to help. Their hands brushed, and instead of retracting, they lingered together, fingertips barely touching, hearts quickening in synchronized rhythm. Neither spoke, yet the air around them seemed to vibrate with unacknowledged desire. He wanted to ask, to confirm, to act, but fear of overstepping, and the weight of their family connection, kept him still. And yet, the silence itself became a language. In every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile, they were speaking to each other without words. The slow, simmering connection between them deepened, the unspoken intimacy planting a seed that promised something extraordinary. By the end of the evening, when he left, he felt it. The undeniable awareness that their bond was no longer just familial, but something far more compelling, something that would shape the days and nights to come. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the outside world seemed to hold its breath. The young man found himself in her study, helping organize a stack of old books and papers. She was nearby, moving with that effortless grace that always seemed to draw his attention. The room was small, intimate, lit by a single lamp that cast a warm, golden glow across the shelves. Dust motes floated lazily in the light, and the faint smell of polished wood and old pages made the space feel suspended in time. As he handed her a book, their hands brushed. Just a fleeting contact, but it was enough to make him pause. He felt the warmth of her skin, the softness of her fingers against his, and the subtle pressure that lingered longer than necessary. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her gaze met his, steady, knowing, as if silently acknowledging the tension that had been building for weeks. The air between them was charged, yet neither spoke. She leaned slightly to place the book on the shelf, and the movement brought her shoulder close to his arm. He could feel the heat of her presence, the faint brush of her sweater against his skin. His heartbeat quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm, aware of the line they were approaching but unwilling to retreat. She smiled softly, not teasingly, but in a way that made the room feel smaller, more intimate. He noticed the small details, the subtle tilt of her head, the way her eyes caught the light, the way her hair fell just so across her collarbone. Every movement, every gesture, seemed designed to draw him in without saying a word. He found himself brushing a strand of hair away from her face, and she didn't flinch. Her eyes held his for a long moment, warm and vulnerable, and he felt a pull that was impossible to resist. Their proximity made every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the shuffle of papers, the soft rustle of fabric, feel amplified, as though the world outside had vanished entirely. And then, almost instinctively, she leaned a little closer, her side brushing against his. The contact was light, accidental, yet intentional enough to send a shiver through him. He swallowed, aware of the electricity running between them, a tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying. For a heartbeat, he wanted to close the distance, to let the unspoken desire finally surface, but he held back, savoring the moment, the anticipation, the slow burn of connection that had been building from the very first day. They moved through the study together, arranging books, straightening papers, but every small movement carried weight. A hand brushed a shoulder, a foot accidentally touched. A shared glance lingered just a second too long. It was in these tiny, delicate interactions that the story of their bond deepened, a connection defined as much by what was left unsaid as by the gestures they could afford. By the time the evening drew to a close, the young man left the study with his mind spinning. The memory of her warmth, her subtle touches, and the closeness they had shared, simple, unspoken, and yet profoundly intimate, lingered with him. In that quiet, suspended moment, he realized the slow burn between them had grown into something undeniable, a tension that promised their connection would only grow stronger, more complicated, and infinitely more magnetic in the days to come. The night had settled into a hushed quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every sound feel amplified. The young man found himself sitting in her living room, a soft blanket draped across the couch where they shared the space. A single lamp cast a golden glow over the room, highlighting the gentle lines of her face and the warmth in her eyes. Outside, the world seemed distant, the faint hum of traffic and occasional chirping of crickets forming a soft backdrop to their intimate bubble. For weeks, they had danced around their feelings. Small touches, lingering glances, subtle gestures that hinted at what neither dared say aloud. Tonight, the restraint had reached its limit. She broke the silence first, her voice low but steady, carrying the weight of honesty. "I've wanted this," she said. "Wanted you, for longer than I expected." Her words weren't boastful or teasing. They were quiet, vulnerable, and profoundly deliberate. His heart raced. He wanted to reach out, to respond, to close the distance that had stretched between them for weeks, but he hesitated. There was the fear of misreading her intentions, of the age difference, of the complicated family bond. and yet the pull between them was undeniable. He swallowed hard, meeting her gaze, feeling the warmth of her presence like a physical force. I felt it too, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. I didn't know if I should, if it was right. His hand twitched, hovering over the blanket, hesitant to touch her yet aching to bridge the gap. She leaned a fraction closer, the warmth of her shoulder brushing against his. I understand, she murmured, her hand resting lightly near his, as though daring him to take it. Her eyes searched his, not for an answer, but for acknowledgement, for connection. He could see the vulnerability beneath her confidence, the quiet courage it took to admit desire without pressure, without expectation. The silence stretched, but it was a comfortable one, heavy with meaning. He became acutely aware of every detail, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her skin so close to his. Each subtle movement, each hesitant glance, seemed magnified, making the space between them electric with anticipation. Neither of them moved immediately, and in that hesitation, the tension deepened. They didn't need words. The shared understanding was enough. The confession had been made, the feelings acknowledged, but the line between restraint and surrender was still a delicate balance. Finally, he exhaled, a long, slow release of tension. He shifted slightly closer, careful yet deliberate, letting his presence communicate what words could not. She responded by tilting her head, letting her shoulder brush more fully against him. No kiss was given, no hand held. Yet the intimacy was complete, rooted in trust, acknowledgement, and the shared recognition of desire tempered by patience. By the end of the night, both of them knew something fundamental had changed. The confession had broken the dam, even if only partially. Their connection had deepened, no longer confined to glances and fleeting touches, but solidified in honesty, vulnerability, and the tantalizing possibility of what might come next. In that quiet living room, a slow burn that had been smoldering for weeks flared subtly yet powerfully, setting the stage for the tender intimacy and emotional exploration to follow. The days after their confession were different, charged with unspoken understanding, yet gentle, patient, and deliberate. The young man noticed every nuance of her presence, every subtle invitation to closeness. She didn't rush, didn't demand, but in every glance, every soft smile, every brush of a hand, she spoke volumes. One evening, they found themselves in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner together. The room was warm with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of garlic and herbs. He reached for a pot on the counter just as she did, and their hands brushed lightly. This time, neither pulled away. Instead, their fingers lingered for a heartbeat longer, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared closeness. It was electric and safe at the same time, a promise held in a touch rather than spoken aloud. As they moved around the kitchen, chopping vegetables and stirring sauces, their physical proximity became a language of its own. When she leaned slightly against the counter, he stepped closer, offering an accidental but intentional closeness. When he handed her a spoonful of sauce to taste, their fingers touched, and he saw her smile soften in a way that made his chest tighten. Every small contact carried weight, yet it was grounded in warmth and trust rather than urgency or desire to rush. Later, they settled on the couch, side by side under a shared blanket. Their shoulders brushed, and gradually, their knees pressed lightly together. Neither spoke immediately, letting the comfort of presence fill the space. She rested her head briefly on his shoulder, not in urgency, but in quiet surrender to a shared moment. He felt her warmth, steady and real, and let his arms settle naturally around her. A gesture of protection, intimacy, and unspoken affection. The intimacy wasn't about words, it was about trust. In the subtle gestures, they communicated more than they ever could have allowed. The tilt of a head, the careful alignment of a body closer to the others, the gentle squeeze of hands while moving from the couch to the kitchen or back. Every movement, every glance, every sigh became a thread weaving their connection deeper. Even in silence, they learned about each other. He noticed the faint tremor in her hands when she was absorbed in thought, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him, the warmth in her voice when she spoke to him alone. She noticed his small hesitations, the gentle attentiveness in his touch, the subtle way he mirrored her movements, respecting boundaries while cherishing closeness. By the end of the evening, neither could deny the depth of their connection. It wasn't hurried, it wasn't loud. It was patient, tender, and deliberate. Every gesture reinforced trust, emotional intimacy, and the slow-building rhythm of romance. In that quiet, shared warmth, they discovered the beauty of being close without rushing, of letting affection and desire coexist with patience and respect. It was the kind of intimacy that lingered in memory, setting the stage for a final resolution that could honor both their hearts and their story. Morning light spilled gently across the room, soft and golden, casting a warm glow over the living room where they had spent the quiet night before. The young man stirred awake, still feeling the echo of the tenderness from the previous evening, the brush of her hair against his arm, the faint warmth of her shoulder resting against him, the softness of her breath in the shared silence. For the first time, their connection felt fully grounded, a tangible presence rather than an unspoken tension. She was awake too, sitting on the couch nearby, a blanket loosely draped around her shoulders. Her eyes caught his across the room, and the faintest smile curved her lips, a mixture of reassurance, affection, and something deeper, something that spoke of trust earned, desire acknowledged, and boundaries respected. The intensity of their previous weeks, the brushes of fingers, lingering glances, small touches, had led to this moment. Calm, steady, and intimate. They didn't rush to speak, allowing the quiet of the morning to envelop them. The hum of the city outside was distant, almost imperceptible, leaving them cocooned in a world of their own making. He reached for her hand, a natural, deliberate movement that carried all the emotions words could not. She didn't hesitate, letting their fingers intertwine with ease, a physical promise of patience, understanding, and closeness. As they sat together, small gestures became the language of their bond. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, and she leaned slightly into him, their heads nearly touching. No words were necessary. The warmth of presence, the gentle contact, and the steady rhythm of their breathing communicated more than any declaration could. They had crossed a threshold, not of impulsive passion, but of trust, acceptance, and the deepening of emotional intimacy that defined their slow-burn romance. He thought back to the early days, the hesitation, the unspoken tension, the accidental touches, and the confessions held close in the quiet of night. Each step had been measured, deliberate, and necessary. Each pause, each hesitation, had allowed their bond to deepen naturally. And now, in this moment, the culmination of weeks of subtle gestures and careful restraint felt right. They were together, fully, yet with a sense of balance that honored both their hearts and their lives. They spoke then, softly, about what this meant, acknowledging the age difference, the complexities of family ties, and the uncertainties of the future. Yet their words were gentle, without fear or doubt, because the foundation had already been laid. Trust, mutual respect, and an emotional connection that neither could ignore. The young man leaned closer, resting his forehead briefly against hers. She responded instinctively, closing her eyes for a heartbeat, savoring the closeness. By the time the sun fully rose, spilling golden light across the room, they were holding hands, sharing quiet smiles, and breathing together in a rhythm that felt entirely their own. The slow burn had reached its resolution, not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but with the quiet certainty of connection, affection, and mutual desire to explore their bond carefully, respectfully, and fully. In that shared morning stillness, they knew something profound. This was only the beginning, yet it was complete. They had crossed from tension to intimacy, from hesitation to trust, from longing to gentle fulfillment. And in that quiet, sunlit room, with their hands entwined and hearts aligned, their story reached its emotional resolution. Tender, YouTube-safe, and beautifully human. If this slow-burn story of desire, hesitation, and connection moved you, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter in our journey of heartfelt romance. And tell us in the comments, have you ever felt a connection so intense it left you breathless?